let me know. We can move on and talk about stocks, or we can just keep talking about expensive apartments in New York City. It is your choice. That's right. You guys can actually decide what we're going to talk about. All right. What's going on in the market? It is not particularly good. Powell, is he done? He seems to be done. Powell says, this is a summary from Bloomberg, higher rates are needed to curb inflation. When a more moderate pace for hikes, we are far from our inflation target. Computer-driven algorithms are dethroning external money managers at Goldman Sachs. Wow. Well, I could see that because they kind of suck. I mean, these guys are not that good. So, I mean, a random computer, we talked about this before, right? Like tip ranks. If you look at tip ranks, once you're past the top 10, you're lucky to be 50-50 in the picks. And so letting the AI flip a coin instead of a person flipping a coin is a lot cheaper. All right, so the gist of all this Fed stuff is that Powell's basically saying we need 2 more rate hikes, at least, not at minimum. He's basically saying we do need 2 more rate hikes. That will put us up to 5.5 to 5.75%. My target, where I said the Fed would start, was 6%. And I said this before they started hiking. That was like a year and something ago. So great. But also, I also thought that would lead to a market correction. That hasn't happened for sure. But we'll see. Oh, that's what I wanted to talk about today. See, if I babble long enough, I remember what I wanted to talk about. The apartment. No. I don't know why. Somehow when I saw the headline, which I don't remember what the headline was anymore, when I saw this headline, I thought they were doing something nice for people. I thought they were getting a $26,000, annual apartment. I don't know why I thought that. I really don't. I thought that they were doing something to help people in the world, and somehow maybe when they said by choice, I was thinking, oh my God, they're giving people who are on Broadway or something like that, or people who are people in the Philharmonic, like they're giving them low-cost apartments so that they can live in the city instead of like commuting in from Jersey, and spending 2 hours back and forth carrying their cellos and violins and whatever they do. But no, that's not the case at all. It's for richer. It's for people who have no concept of money. I mean, come on, $26,000 a month. $1,000 a day to live in the place you live in. That's a lot of money. I mean, I guess you can argue it's only $300,000 a year, right? So, I mean, well, that's the thing. I mean, I object to people who buy $100 million houses too. I think they're idiots. Sorry if any of that's. Sorry if it's one of you guys, but I mean, come on. What are you really getting? How do you justify it? I always say it to my friends who buy art, because they'll be like, someone wants to show me like a $1 million painting or a $10 million painting, and I'm like, I have a painting, and he's like, yeah, but this one, is painted by so-and-so. I'm like, well, mine was painted by a guy too. I like mine. I like mine better than yours. Not always better. I mean, somebody has a cool Picasso or something like that, I can relate, but not for the money. I can get a copy. I don't understand people. I really don't. And as far as this goes, I mean, I made this choice. It's like, gee, yeah, you can spend all your money living in a place in New York City, or you can live somewhere else and have tons of extra money and for other stuff than the teeny tiny space you're allocated. I just don't get it. I don't know. I guess that's why I don't sell real estate. Just, I'd be like, why are you doing this? Why are you taking all of your money and putting it into a place you live, which isn't even necessarily a great place? Anyway, all right, so where were we? Yes. Oh, what I wanted to talk about. Now I remember. Well, we've been talking about a few things. Let's start with our Juneteenth spectacular. There it goes. What did I talk about on Juneteenth? Oh, yes, I talked about the breadth of the rally. That's right. All right. We're having this nice rally. Let's start with that concept. We're having this nice rally. It was a nice rally anyway. It's kind of, fading. So we went all the way from here, the week bounce. Okay, so our normal range. We broke out of our range, which had been lasting for a very long time. Let's start with that story, right? We were good. We went up. We went down. We held our retrace line. We went back to the week bounce line. We consolidated. So we should have seen this coming. But instead, I decided that this was a good time to cash out because I was worried that bad things were going to happen. Bad things did happen right after we cashed out, but then good things started happening. But were they really good? We went up because the dollar got weaker. People thought, well, let's illustrate. So the dollar has gotten weaker. What kind of chart is it? This is daily. So this is what happened in June, right? Dollar has gotten substantially weaker in June. Now, there was no particularly good reason for that. Everybody was trying to push the dollar down, and that was to help the market go up. So when I mean, here's early June, here's the S&P in June, all right? So it's a dollar rally. The S&P went up from 4,100 to 4,400 is 300, and 300 divided by 4 is what, 7.5%, right? And the dollar fell from 450 to 150, which is 3% roughly, a little less than 3%, good 2.5%. So basically, they're in sync. So if that's happening, and the only real reason that that's happening, well, here's the reasons. The Fed was going to pause, which caused the dollar to be weaker, right? If the Fed is going to pause, the money is easier, and the dollar, there's more money floating around, therefore the dollar becomes weaker. So the rumors that the Fed was going to pause and stay paused or even lower rates, which was going around, was feeding this dollar drop. At the same time, people are saying that inflation is under control, which is not necessarily true. People are saying that employment is coming down, also not necessarily true. Supply chains are unkinking. There's a strike in the California port. So when I read this stuff and I know that it's not necessarily true, I'm not really inclined to like jump in and buy stuff and chase the rally. It's a tough decision. It's hard to not join the crowd when everybody's running into something, but it didn't feel like a right thing. We have deployed some of our cash, because you don't want to miss out if it really is a sticky rally, but we've overhedged, or maybe not overhedged. We'll find out. But I mean, at the moment, it feels like we're overhedged, and so we're not really making a lot of money in the overall portfolios. It's been 1 month. We started them in mid-May. Mid-May is when we started new portfolios. So we just missed this rally, but it's a good rally. So, we caught some of it, but not all of it. We weren't aggressive. That's fine. So, and like I said, so what happens? I read these things and I look at it and say, is this real? Is this true? There's also been a rumor. They pulled out all the stops to try to knock the dollar down. Janet Yellen even said something about the dollar not being so much of the reserve currency that it is in the future. And China and some other countries we're talking about, which they always talk about, we're talking about, you know, figuring out some way to make themselves a more important currency and have a maybe create a block currency for Asia that's linked to the yuan in China, and blah blah blah, all bullshit. And the Saudis are talking about, you know, no longer accepting dollars for oil. And again, it's bullshit, because instead of what do you accept instead? Oil trades in dollars, okay? 100 million barrels a day at $100, not $100, what is it, 70 bucks, 70 bucks. So $7 billion a day, right? Here's the problem with oil. Here's the problem with everything, that all commodities are like this. What is that? Did I actually hit calculator? I hit calendar instead of calculator. That's a calculator. So $70 a barrel times 100 million is $7 billion a day. But the way oil works, it's not a direct thing. Like the Saudis don't sell it to American Airlines, right? The Saudis sell it to a guy who's got a ship, or anybody, doesn't matter who, but you know, so whether it's a ship or a pipeline, but the Saudis sell it to a guy who's got a ship. Okay? So here's your, assuming there's only one transaction in the world, let's look at how it works. They want $7 billion now. The guy with the ship has to borrow $7 billion. He doesn't have $7 billion. He's got a ship. He's got to borrow $7 billion to pay the Saudis for the oil. Then he's got to take the oil on the ship, pay for the insurance, pay for the crew, pay for the fuel to send it over, and he's got a contract, hopefully, to sell it somewhere. Now, that's kind of tricky, and holding $7 billion in debt for 30 days is expensive, and so on and so forth. Even if you have a guaranteed customer, it's still a lot of money to float. So what they do is they flip it to another party who is brokering the deal on the far side. So the Saudis sell it to the guy with the ship flips it to a financier. The financier will take it and they will flip it to a receiving operator. This is just one transaction every time this happens. And they flip the receiving operator, so now that one is filled out, and there's days and days of float involved in each one of these things. And none of the stuff that happens individually. It's like a hot potato. Somebody's got to hold it, and eventually there's going to be a transaction, you hope. So, and it goes over. And meanwhile, while you're doing this, the price of oil is going up and down, and it matters a lot to each one of these people. It's like millions. You know, it's not one transaction. It's, you know, figure an average transaction is 1 million barrels, right? So it's up and down 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, because the oil moves much more than you would think it should. Is very, very volatile, considering what a voluminous trading commodity it is. It is not steady at all. And you would think that the supply of oil doesn't change that much and the demand for oil doesn't change that much. If you really looked at the chart, it doesn't. It's very difficult to move either side insignificantly. But unlike any other commodity, basically, oil will go up and down because it's bullshit manipulated constantly. That's what it is. It's a manipulation. It's not a natural thing. You know, copper demand, coal demand. Sure, you know, it might get extra cold and there's more demand for coal. You might have a housing boom and they need more copper, so on and so forth. But the reality is most commodities are fairly bandy and steady because supply and demand don't change that quickly. Oil up and down 10% in a week, like it's nothing. You know, supply and demand can't possibly change 10% in a week. Can't happen. It's a crazy market, but that's because it's completely manipulated. Anyway, so the shipping guy flips it to the finance guy flips it to the the port guy on the other side, and the port guy is going to store it and finally sell it to, a jet line, airline, FedEx, whoever, whoever actually needs the fuel. Or they're going to put it into refinery and refine. Well, in all cases, they're pretty much going to a refinery, and the refinery is going to take it and turn it into something that can actually be bought, because nobody wants the actual oil, they want it refined. So you're looking at like 5 transactions per barrel of oil to get it from one place to the other, to get it from the producer to the final consumer. And even if the producer goes to the refinery still flips it to a shipper, and you still have the same process going out the other side. It's always going to be minimum 4, probably 5 transactions. So you don't need $7 billion a day. You kind of need, I don't want to say 5 times, but let's say you need 3 times. You probably need about $21 billion a day just to float oil. And don't forget, every commodity is traded in dollars. So it's 7 times, so it's 21. So it's $21 billion times 365 days is $7 trillion of oil transactions. So you would think that Saudi Arabia could make any currency the reserve currency of the world, because they control 1/3 of the oil. So they're controlling $2 trillion worth of transactions. If they say they won't take it in dollars, well, not really though. I mean, that's the problem. They're not really doing it. They're only controlling that initial transaction. So if they say we're only going to accept dollars, they can force the people who are dealing directly with them to accept the dollars. But in the grand scheme of $7 trillion, they're not going to have that much power. So like I said, they're only responsible for 1/5. Well, I'm sorry, they're responsible for 1/3, which is 2.5 trillion, right? And they're responsible for 1/5 of 1/3. So they're responsible for $500 billion worth of transactions, right? It's 1/5, because these are 5 transactions, 1/5, and they have 1/3 of all the oil in the world, not even, more like 30%. But they got 1/3 of 1/5, and that works out to roughly $500 billion. So when you read in the papers and it says the Saudis are going to pair up with China and make the yuan the reserve currency for oil, blah, 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 it ain't their call. They can take their 500 billion in yuan, and they can make that the reserve currency for their oil. And that's even assuming that Americans are going to buy it. Otherwise, Americans just, American companies might just say, well, we're not going to buy oil from you. We don't really buy oil from them now. We don't buy oil from Saudi Arabia. They're a very small supplier for us, maybe 1.5 million barrels a day. Not a big deal. And I mean the whole OPEC, not just Saudi Arabia. So they can say anything they want, but when you got to understand what bullshit it is, because the sheer weight of these transactions, first of all, there aren't enough yuan in circulation to come anywhere near $7 trillion worth of transactions. There just isn't. Second of all, why would anybody who is not in Asia want to trade any yuan for oil? Why am I going? Why is United Airlines going to start writing out checks in yuan? They're not going to do it. And why are other countries? And plus, China doesn't have really the greatest reputation for being a safe place to deal with politically, economically. Chinese people don't even want yuan. They have problems. They're trying to stop people from converting their yuan to dollars in China. Now you want to go out of China and do it? It's ridiculous. If Saudi Arabia had the power to take away the dollar dominance in oil trading, they would have done it at some point when they actually had power or when OPEC had power. They don't. They're just saber rattling to make Putin happy. They're threatening. It's not, but it's not real. So when you see the dollar getting talked down by nonsense like that, you got to take the market rally with a grain of salt, because market rally is being driven by the dollar dump. And you don't know what's going to stick exactly. You don't know what you don't know how much of it's going to take hold. But the reality is, you got to know that it's bullshit. That's going to help you make better investing decisions. You got to understand the mechanisms against which things are trading. So, and here, same thing, the breadth of the rally. This entire rally is being driven by like 7 stocks. 7 stocks have driven all of the S&P 500's returns for the year. Not just this recent thing. No, that's just NVIDIA. Go back to the S&P. So not just this June thing, but the whole year. So from 38.50 to 44.50, which is 600, and that's 38. So it's like, almost 20%. So this entire rally has been driven by 7 stocks. And if it wasn't for those 7 stocks, we wouldn't have a rally. So here they are. NVIDIA is up 184%. If you have, they're not all the same price, but let's say NVIDIA is an average NASDAQ stock, and it's not. It's a little heavier weighted than most. But even if you took away the weighting and assumed that it was evenly weighted, when you have 100 stocks, right, and they're flat, go up 0%, but then you have one stock that goes up 184%, you divide that by 100 stocks, then it makes every stock go up 1.8%. One stock, that's just NVIDIA. That's how it works. You got to realize, and also then you have to take into account the weighting. So realistically, since NVIDIA is a fairly heavy weighted stock on the NASDAQ, it's really pulling the index up like 3%, 4%. Just NVIDIA. Facebook, also obviously huge NASDAQ component, up 133%. There's a few more percent. AMD up 100%. CRM up 68%. Tesla also heavily weighted, up 136%. Microsoft, second only to Apple, up 54% in weighting. Amazon's up 50%. Apple is up 41%, but Apple is 20% of the NASDAQ. So 20% is up 40%. That's 8% right there. Just Apple. Why is it heavily weighted like that? Because it's a freaking $3 trillion company. It's I forgot what the NASDAQ's total value is, but the NASDAQ's total value is like $25 trillion. So it's like, more than 10% of the NASDAQ's total value is one stock. That's how 7 stocks can be the entire gain of the NASDAQ. The rest, not all the rest, but the net of the rest of the trading of the NASDAQ, the other 93 stocks in the NASDAQ 100, flat, net flat for the year. That's why I say be patient, because when you look at the watch list and you look at what's still available, you say, when you see there's still half of the watch list still hasn't moved, then there's no hurry to invest. Then it's not a real, first of all, because it's not a real rally. It means some stuff is moving, but other stuff is just laying there. Why is the other stuff laying there if everything is so great? I was talking to a guy, I think it was yesterday. It was yesterday. So I was talking to this guy, and he's doing an oil trade. And I mean a real oil trade, like for actual oil. And his oil trade, he has a deal He showed me 2 contracts. Each contract is for $121 million. So there's like I said, there's tons of contracts involved, right? So there's a supplier contract, $121 million of products is going to be sold. And he's got a buyer lined up, $121 million. And he's just doing it for the commission in between. All right. But to release the oil, he has to put down $6 million, and they'll take the rest on a consignment. And I said, there's something wrong with this, because if you think about it, it's too good to be true. So basically, you're saying that for $6 million in advance, you're going to finance this $121 million deal to a flip. You'll get, the guy will get $6 million back plus, some interest on his loan, his short-term loan. And the oil will transact in 30 days, and you will collect, like a 5% commission, which is still nice. It's like $5-6 million bucks. That'll be the profit on the deal. So that's all very nice, great, sounds good. I said to him, though, the problem is, I said, what happens if the transaction doesn't go through? Then there's no deal, but you still spent, because the $6 million is carrying costs, like the tanker rental and the transfer fees and things like that. So you're taking all the risk. Your $6 million becomes 100% of the risk, and there's no damage to either party in not completing the transaction. In other words, you send this stuff across the ocean, put it in a tanker, send it across the ocean, it gets to the port, and the buyer says, for whatever reason, no, I inspected it, I don't like it, it's not the right grade, it's not the right this or that. Honestly, it's very tough to enforce a contract like that if it's not wanted. Now, in theory, you should easily be able to sell it, but what if the price goes down while you're on your trip? What if the price drops 10%? Then you're down 12 million bucks. In fact, that's the main reason the buyer might cancel, is while you were driving the oil from one place to another for 30 plus days, the price changes. And if the price is in the buyer's favor, he's going to complete the contract. If the price is against the buyer and it's down 12 million and it's below your margin of safety, you're going to lose money. You just made a commodity trade, because that's what you're really doing when you finance these trades. You're doing a futures trade. You're secure, you're paying all the fees and all the costs associated with borrowing $121 million and all the transport fees and everything else. You are taking it now at today's price and moving it. And I've noticed this about oil traders, is they all do this. It's a huge mistake. They trade every day and they take their chances. They don't attempt to time the market. And that's idiotic. I started to get into this. I'm starting to work with oil traders again. I used to do NYMEX stuff, but that was different. This is real trading, like actual, like moving barrels around. And it's really weird because they don't attempt to time it. They just do it every day. And sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. And they're like, well, that's the way it goes. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's like, you can hedge these things. You can play the futures. You're going to sell it, so you can short the oil at a price that makes you money. You don't have to gamble losing money. That's one thing. Second of all, you don't have to do it every day. You can do it when oil seems cheap. Don't work every day. Don't keep borrowing money every day. Just play it when it's low. And of course, you say, well, what's low? We know what's low, though. We know when oil is too low. There's a channel. You might lose once in a while if it breaks the channel, but generally, we know, like here, predominantly from, well, this isn't a very long-term short, so let's do a longer-term short. All right, so predominantly $70 is certainly low. So if I have a 1 month trip, this month I make 10 bucks. This month I make 10 bucks. And this month I make nope, this month is a loser. And this month is so far a little bit of a winner. But I got 2 months I make 10 bucks. And I got a little bit of a profit down here also. or maybe 3, did I say 3 million? Wait, 70. So 1, 2, not a winner, and a partial winner. Okay, so yeah. So 2 big wins, 2 massive, massive wins. You're talking about $10 times $1 million. So it's $10 million profit each trip. And then maybe a net little bit of profit here. So that's versus if every month I went, okay, I'm going to buy oil in December and I deliver it for a loss. I'm going to buy oil in January and deliver it for a loss. I'm going to buy oil. And that's what this is. This is these people panicking out of their contracts. That's what causes these dips at the end of the month. If you're stuck with oil, you start panicking out of your contract because you can't afford this kind of loss. You can't lose $10 million. But you won't lose $10 million if you wait patiently for the right part of the channel. And maybe you could accept over here and say, okay, well, it seems like 74 is pretty good. It's been good here. It was good here. It was good here. So maybe around here, you start saying, okay, let's give it a shot at 74. I'm close enough. But you hedge it because it's not right where you want it. So this one you hedge and you make half as much. This one you hedge and you make half as much. You know, this one you hedge and you say, thank God I hedged. But your predominant buy, the time you whip out your checkbook and start financing things should be down here. Instead of doing 1 per month, do 1 on, do 1 when it's at 70. If it's a, you have a rule. Say if it's at 74, I'll do 1 and I'll hedge and I'll only make half as much as I would have made if I didn't hedge, but at least I don't lose. And at 70, I do 2. And that's how I manage my money. And I show this to people, and they just, they don't get the concept of not playing. I showed this to a couple of guys who are in the business, and I'm like, you make more money. I showed them the numbers. I'm like, you make much more money not trading every month. You make much more money waiting until it's the right time to buy. So anyway, that goes back to stocks and what drives the market. So, there's plenty of things that are still cheap, but I want to be shown that things are worthwhile. CSMH we decided to jump into because that's the semiconductors. So I said if it's going to keep going up, let's play the semiconductors. And of course, Intel we have, because it was laying around down here. So we buy Intel. It's still not very expensive. So that's what we talked about on the weekend. That was my weekend post. It's not weekend, Monday. Well, technically still the weekend. Ooh, what's this? I don't like that. Didn't resolve the page the way I like it. Now here we are. Oh, I see why I'm not signed in. Ha ha ha. Maybe. All right, so Tuesday, right? Commercial, this was about the week ahead. Here I'm talking about now. Other reasons I worry about the market, commercial real estate, and Powell just said it. Commercial real estate is a looming disaster. The thing is, when you rent an office space or a store, you're going to sign a 5-year or 10-year lease. All right. So we had our crisis. Let's go here. Indexes. Nope. Weeklies, even longer than weeklies. Yeah. Monthlies. Okay. So we had a good economy. Basically, since I don't want to say in 2010, 2011, nobody was that confident then, but by 2013, we were getting pretty confident. This was Obama's second term. People were pretty comfy with everything. We were so comfy we elected Trump. You know, we were like, it's funny, let's elect Trump. But we had, you know, this was Obama's second term. Things were steady. The country was going. Everybody's pretty happy with where things were going, so on and so forth. So then Trump gets elected and he cuts taxes, blah, 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 blah. So we had, you know, let's call it 8 pretty good years, right? We had pretty good time from 2012 till 2020. All right. So the economy is expanding, businesses are opening up, there's, you know, things are going good, rates are pretty low, everything seems fine. So things are growing, businesses are doing. So people signing leases, people signing leases, people signing leases, people signing leases, right? All the way up until 2020. Then the entire planet shuts down and everything falls in the tank. And yes, the government excuse me. The government bailed us out. They threw in stimulus checks, did all this other stuff to increase business. And it boosted the market and it kept the economy going. And we're kind of back on track. If we would have just kept going like this, we're kind of right where we would have been. Okay? But the problem is things have changed. And one of the big things that's changed is commercial real estate, obviously. The damage from COVID, what you didn't fix is you didn't fix the fact that now there's a lot of empty cities, relatively empty cities. You know, people started working remotely. They like it better and they prefer it and they want remote jobs now and they don't want to come to the office, and they certainly don't want to come to the office every day. Even if they're going to come to the office, it's only going to be Wednesday, Thursday, for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday kind of thing. And I had some numbers supporting that from, I don't know, was it here? Yeah, it is on this thing. I had some numbers supporting that. So this is a real and genuine change in habits, okay? It's kind of like, I'll tell you what it's kind of like. I watched this show, Fabulous Mrs. Maisel, or something like that on Amazon. It's about a woman comedian in the 50s or 60s or whatever it is. It shows you how much attention I'm paying. I'd say it's the 60s, so it's the 60s. I like period. I love period pieces when they're well done. There's another one called The Gilded Age on HBO. It's about the 1900s. If there's meticulous attention to detail, it makes me, I just love looking at all the little things and what used to happen. So anyway, so I'm watching this show and I'm contemplating, and I grew up in New York in the 70s and the 80s. And you know, so I was at the, you know, the tail end. This is on the end of the baby boomers, 1963. So I'm like the last baby boomer year. And hardly really a baby boomer at all, but that's technically what I am. I mean, so far, you know, the war was like a distant memory for me. Not a distant memory, it was a distant memory for me. It was a distant thing for me, but my mom actually, you know, grew up in London in the war. Like she was born in 1940. The war lasted 4 more years, 5 more years, and 5 more years. So she's 5 years old. So her whole first 5 years of life is like boom, 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 and bombs and not air raid drills, air raids on like a regular basis. You know, I mean that was her life. It's like living in freaking Ukraine now. I mean, they were getting bombed all the time. I mean, to me, it's just like something my mom would tell me about, but it wasn't a real thing. So anyway, born 1963. So bottom line is, though, I always noticed, though, in my life, everything was sort of like catered to me, because all the people who went before me, my older brothers and that whole generation ahead of me, the whole people who were 10, 20 years younger than me, they started building all these clubs and the nightlife and the restaurants and blah, blah, blah. So I was never at the forefront of these things, because by the time I was hitting the clubs, there were thousands of them. But I noticed that in the 60s, that's when this club culture started. And why did it start? Because people were getting, you know, because the economy was doing well and people were into going out and doing things in entertainment. And automation was giving people more free time than they were looking for things to do. And there was no, you know, TV was barely a thing. And there was no web, there was no phones and things like that. So what did? You went out. Everybody went out all the time. And the clubs the bars had entertainers, the restaurants had entertainers. Being in it, you know, most places had some kind of performance, live music, this or that. It was incredibly common back then. I was saying to my kids were watching it, and they were like, was it really like that? Did you actually, like, everywhere you went, there were people, like, you know, doing stuff? Because we don't have that anymore. It's a very specific thing. If you want to go see a band or you want to go see a restaurant, it's pretty limited now. That whole thing died. But when I was a kid, I was watching this Mrs. Maisel thing. And I'm watching that. When I was a kid, when I was going out, when I was a teenager, that was my life too. It was everywhere. Everywhere had a band. Everywhere had something going on. People are always gathering for something and doing things together, and groups of kids would go around and you know, find places to go and whatever. It's like just a totally different culture. All right, but it changed. And when it changed, but I think we still had a club culture in the 80s. When I got back from college, it was still pretty thriving. In the 90s, it kind of changed, but in 2000, it died so fast. And by the time my kids, you know, who were born, Maddie, my oldest girl was born in 2000, you know, when she hit 21, it was actually, you know, we ended up going to Vegas because honestly, there was no cool thing to do. There was no way to have a cool a week of going to bars and clubs in New York. You know, you could stretch it and go, but you're forcing it. It's not that kind of town anymore. Even New York City is not that kind of town anymore. And that's sad. But anyway, the point is, though, it's not about that. It's about the change in the culture. And it's not coming back. So if you're a nightclub owner in New York, like I remember when the Palladium was an old, I think it was started as a movie theater. I don't know. I think it was a movie theater. It changed it into a rock and roll place. It was one of the greatest rock and roll places ever, because it's basically just a movie theater that had a stage, and on the stage there would be like Elton John, you know, and there's a movie theater's worth of people watching Elton John play in this little place, but it was incredible. And I remember at some point they said, oh, we're gonna tear out the seats and make it a dance club for a couple of weeks, and you know, we're gonna have dance parties, and we're gonna put in new seats. Well, they never put the new seats in. Place closed down pretty soon after that because nothing they were doing was working, and that was the beginning of the end for the New York club scene. You know, and all the good places closed down for whatever reason. So anyway, the culture changed, the usage changed, and if you don't recognize it and you just keep trying to do the same thing, you're going to lose your ass. You can't keep saying this works. You got to pay attention to the changes in your customers' needs and the changing habits and the changing social means. Phones, you know, phones change things a lot. I think cell phones, I mean, because it didn't, you would think it would make it because our culture, because as older people, we think in terms of getting together. So you think of a phone as like a useful way to get together, which is really what I use it for mostly. It's like, yeah, okay, where are you going to be? Okay, great, see you there. But the kids don't think of it that way. They think of the phone as they are together. They don't think of it, they don't think of needing to get together. we had to verbally communicate. We wanted to be in a group. To talk to our friends to us meant to be together with our friends somewhere, doing something, hanging out, whatever. We wanted to be with our friends. They feel like they're with their friends, even though they're only just texting each other, because we're kind of prejudiced that that's not really talking, but to them, that's how they communicate. So why would why would it be different? If they were telepaths and they just communicated mentally, why would they need to be together, right? It's the same thing. If you think about it, if they were telepathic and they communicated with their thoughts and they could communicate across distances, would there be any reason for them to walk near each other? No, not really. I mean, we feel like, well, you want to really be with somebody and hang out with them and just do fun stuff together. It seems right. They don't feel that way. They are doing fun stuff together. My Madeline, she plays Warcraft, and she had like one of her best friends was a girl in England she had never physically met. One of her best friends in life when she was, a teenager, was a girl she had known for like 7 years, and they have had adventures together that you and I could not possibly imagine. They have slain dragons. They have fought off armies of orcs. They have built a castle with all of their friends and defended it from invaders and blah blah blah. They've had amazing, incredible adventures their whole lives, yet they never actually physically met each other. And we went to England, and they finally got together. It was funny because I was very curious about how it was going to go. And even Maddie was a little worried about what would happen to meet a friend in person, but it was really like two people who hadn't seen each other in years, just boom, instantly like grabbed each other, and they were hugging, and they had the best weekend together. As if they'd known each other their whole lives, because they had. It's just as valid as the relationships that we have. It's just weird to us. Anyway, so things change. So the phone culture people, who are now the ones in the businesses and the ones in the offices, somebody finally told them, here, you don't have to go to the office to be employed. You don't have to go to the office to work. You don't have to do this stupid, idiotic, drone-ish, sit at the desk for no particular reason thing. It doesn't make any sense. You could sit at your desk at home and do the same work, and you'd be less annoyed by everybody else in the office. So it's very hard for us to accept the fact that office culture has changed. It's not necessary. And the bosses won't accept it, and the people won't accept it. And in other words, rather than a lot of major companies, you're seeing it, rather than accept it and adapt their company to the new paradigm, they are instead trying to force all the people back to the office to get back in the mold that they're used to. And I don't think it's going to work. It's not working, but the key is it's not working right now. And so, like I said, so all these companies, getting back to the main point, if you accept the fact there's a change and it's going to be permanent, what's happening now is office buildings are currently 50% occupied by tenants. They're half empty. Obviously, a huge strain on the landlords, not making the money they're supposed to be making, maybe losing money, whatever. There's been a couple of walkouts in San Francisco. A major hotel and a shopping mall were abandoned by their owners. Abandoned, just walked away. They sue me to the bank, basically. That's how they did it. They just said bye bye and gave the keys to the bank and said, have fun running your mall. It's kind of weird too. So anyway, so 50% occupancy, it doesn't cut it. But it's not 50% occupied, because inside the company, this is the key, inside the 50% companies that are occupying space, those companies are only 50% occupied by staff. They don't need half the space they have. And anybody who doesn't believe that 25% total occupancy, actual occupancy, is not going to be a disaster for commercial real estate. Just doesn't, no concept of math, basically. It can't happen. It can't be done. So it's not only that, though, it's also the fact that now you've got this downtown district full of buildings, and I can't imagine, I'm from the Northeast, so for me, I just think I travel enough. I mean, most towns have a downtown district with buildings, right? Most decent sized cities have some kind of downtown where there's a bunch of buildings and all the stores are there, not to service residents, but to service those buildings. And they're open in the daytime from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And they serve breakfast and lunch and something else or whatever, but they're really not there for people. They're there for all the workers. Well, if there's 75% less workers than there were when they were first built and thought about as businesses, they're already suffering too. And those guys are actually suffering more. And you can go walk down almost any downtown in America and you'll see the result of that. Store for rent, store for rent, store for rent, store for rent. Just so many in the middle of what you would think would be a great location. Like, oh, what a great location for a store. No, it's not. There's no one there. No one is coming. So it's a disaster, but for the CRE industry, it's a disaster that's affecting, well, let's say no realization. Let's say now people are realizing it's untenable. So in 2022, so basically you've got your leases from 2012 that come due in 2022 and 2013 come due in 2023. It's only a couple of years worth of people. So 2 out of 10, let's say 20%, only 20% of your tenants are looking to renegotiate their leases so far. But they will renegotiate their leases and they only need half the space they have now on the average. So they will either leave and go somewhere cheaper or they will renegotiate their leases for substantially less money. And that's happening now. So if 20% of your tenants want 50% less space or 50% less payments in one way or another, okay, you are going to lose 10% of your revenue, right? That's what we're seeing now. But people are looking at these commercial real estate ventures and saying, well, okay, they only lost 10% of their revenue, they'll snap back. What if they don't? What if next year it's 15% and the year after that 20%, the year after that 30%, the year after that 40%? So sometime in the next 3 years, they're going to go bankrupt. It's not coming back. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And then it hits the banks. But it's a very, very slow moving crisis. It's happening, but it happens over the course of 10 years of rent turnovers and renewals. So, there will be a crisis. When there will be a crisis is hard to say, but the bottom line is things have changed and they've probably changed permanently. And it's a very, very tough thing. It's not, and it affects the people who own the buildings. It affects the people who service the buildings, as far as companies that clean it, companies that feed the people in the building, so on and so forth. It affects, and of course, people who are employed by the buildings, right? Security guards and things like that. It affects, the parking garages in the area. There's a lot of stuff, right? And then it affects the city and their tax revenue base and their base of income and their base of consumption taxes, right? Like in New York City, you buy something, it's 7% tax. So all those office workers who used to make all those purchases are not there anymore. So less tax revenue for the city. Then the landlords are all starting to petition for lower assessments on the buildings. So they want to pay the city less taxes because they're saying, how could you possibly say this is a $100 million building when my rents are this and I got this and then the guy next to me sold his building for $40 million. You can't tax me on $100 million when my comp values are 40 million. That's how property taxes work. You go to court and you settle with the city on a number. But the reality is the city can't just randomly charge you more money than it's worth. The lower revenues for the city, stores going out of business, vendors going out of business, and the landlords go out of business eventually. It's terrible. Now, there are people who are benefiting, right? Like, in fact, we were just talking today about Lennar, or was that today or yesterday? I don't remember. I lost track already. But we talked about Lennar as a home builder because people are buying bigger homes because they work at home now and they need the space. They need an office space in their house. They don't want to, just set up a thing in their living room. There is a housing shortage because we went, from this whole year, we didn't really build any houses. And even into this year, we almost went 2 years without basically building any houses. Very, very few. Also, people have been reluctant to sell their houses. They don't want to move and this and that. So there's a very low inventory of houses available. We're very short of homes, like 3.8 million homes short. That means somebody who builds houses is in good shape. Not somebody who builds offices. Now, also though, even with this REIT stuff, I talked about downtown office space, and you can see what's happening, right? The downtown office goes like this. Retail goes like that, and downtown residential starts falling off too. It's no longer somewhere people want to live, even for $26,000 a month. I don't know why. So we looked at like who's actually in trouble. So I talked about some commercial real estate. Boston properties. Anything involving the Northeast or the West Coast, stay away from. So Boston properties is huge. They're based in the Northeast. But when you look, where is their space? Boston, Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, and DC. Every single one of those has outflows of people. Terrible, terrible idea. So they dropped 60%, but they dropped 60%, then it's not coming back. People are not running back to their offices. So what I was looking at was, and I said $55 is still 8.6 billion. It's down 60%. Sounds great, but $55 is still $8.6 billion, and they'll be lucky to make $400 million. That's 20 times earnings at this price. And like I said, I expect things to get worse, not better. SL Green. They're huge in Manhattan. That means just you may as well split your throat if you're going to buy this stuff. They're down 75 cents. They bounced back. I said at the time they were back 66%. I said that's not a good sign. They're down again. They're not even making a profit. I don't understand why people. Why would anyone want to buy it? They're losing money. They losing 150 million on a 1.7 billion valuation. They're losing 10% of their market cap per year. And like I said, every year, more and more people are renewing their leases. The tenants they have left are renewing their leases at much lower prices. You also have to be very careful about when did they buy their properties? When did this company start? When did they spend their money? The more recently they spent the money, the more they overpaid. And the more debt they have, and the more long-term debt they have. It's disastrous for these people. HPP, Hudson Pacific, is in about as much trouble as the name would suggest. They're West Coast focus REIT, 53 properties, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle. Oh no. Their valuation fell from $4 billion to $683 million, but they have now they've got a $683 million valuation with $4 billion in debt. And they're losing $25 million, $100 million a year, $100 million a year. That's 15% of their total value. This company is going to zero. They're going to be bankrupt. And what's going to happen to their 53 buildings? They're going to go on the market at fire sale prices. And now the good news is, I mean, this is what happens when you have a forest fire, right? The good news is they'll go bankrupt. Somebody will pick up their assets cheaply, and they will then be able to rent the office space cheaply. But what's that going to do? That's going to destroy everybody who's left, because suddenly you've got 53 buildings on the market. And while these guys may have paid, you know, let's say $6 billion for the $4 billion debt. So let's say they paid $4 billion for their buildings, right? But they go bankrupt, and all those buildings get bought by somebody else for, let's say, $1.5 billion instead. Well, now that person can charge 40% less rent. But then if they're charging 40% less rent, what's going to happen to all the other REITs that haven't gone bankrupt yet? Now they've got to compete with these guys for selling space. And there's more to it than that. What kind of space? Where is the building? Blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's bad. Vornado's another huge one. They have 78 properties, $7.5 billion in debt, and their book value is supposed to be $6 billion, not even $6 billion. Which gives you an idea, though. If you look, I mean, realize these guys have a $683 million valuation. They're $4 billion in debt. That's insane. These guys are on the edge of collapse anyway. So they've got a book value, but their book value is based on, again, it's based on old paradigms. It's based on the fact that people still believe that these offices are going to get refilled. If you base it on my premise, you would be writing everything down by 25, 30% immediately. And that means these guys are horrifyingly upside down. Now, Highwoods, on the other hand, is a Southeast office REIT where people are moving to. They've got 125 properties. They're more diverse. Okay, so so footage-wise, they have 29 million feet. They have 11 million feet or 12 million feet. They have 125 properties. They have 80 properties. So it's, you know, it's more smaller buildings, not concentrated as much. Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, Orlando. These are all growth areas. And I said, this is a proverbial baby that is thrown out with the bathwater. They're also a REIT. They also went down the same way. See, can you see both of these at the same time? They went down the same way, the same exact way. Look at this hump. Look at this. Look at this. Bounce, spike, crash. They went down exactly the same way because they're in the same ETFs. And they're traded by the same computer algorithms. Just because they're a REIT, because the computers, this is how you beat computers, right? The computer doesn't look at this. The computer doesn't say, where are these properties? How much is the occupancy here? So on and so forth. The computers don't think like that. You have to. This is a baby that's thrown out with the bathwater. They're in hot markets, but they're down 50%. 2289 is 2.4 billion. They'll make 120 million, so that's 20x, but they are a huge growing player, and also that's because they are adding buildings constantly. This is a very much growing company, so I like them a lot. So then I talked about the value of the office buildings, but here you can see it. Look, 10 city average occupancy, 50%. But that doesn't tell you the whole story, because in reality, when you look at it more carefully, and these guys at Castle are pretty good, they got some good stuff. When you look at it most closely, Tuesday is the right side of the chart. That's the best day for people being in the office. Friday is the worst day for people being in the office. Look at these Friday numbers. This is of the companies that are still there, of the remaining companies in a building. This is how occupied they are. 29, 25, forget those, 28, 29, 26. This is freaking Chicago. New York, 25.4% on a Friday. They're pretty good on a Tuesday, but everybody's gone by Friday. You got to be a real junior person to be stuck in New York on a Friday. You know, DC Metro, these are the biggest markets too. These are the largest markets in America. DC, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I mean, how are the businesses going to survive? How are all the restaurants and places that feed these people going to survive when half of the building is empty completely, and of the half that have people, only 28% show up to work? That's 14% of the buildings. What used to be in the building is now still around to get lunch. Can't survive. And to try to make ends meet, they charge you 20 bucks for a pizza now. And what happens? And the people say, well, I'm going to buy pizza. Let's just, you know, more people bring in food from home because there's no good places to eat anymore. It's too expensive. Philly Metro disaster. I mean, look, this is their best day. San Jose, on their best day, 46% of the people show up. This is horrifying numbers, man. So I think we didn't we do a trade? I thought we added HIW. Felt like I did. Oh no, we added Lennar. Oh, you know, I meant to add them. Oh well. Okay. I like them as a REIT. So, you know, I don't just write these articles to amuse myself. I write them like, you know, I want people to think in broad terms about what's actually happening in the market. So then when I say stuff, you know what I'm talking about, instead of just being like, why is he saying, well, you know, why is he suddenly deciding this? It's like I have reasons and I'm trying to like my background thinking when I talk about stuff. So here we have, let's see if anybody has any questions. Nope. Okay. Am I that interesting or is everybody shy? I never understand this when there's no questions. I really know. Feel free to say you're that fascinating, Phil. We don't want to interrupt. Let's see. All right, so this is today's post. And I was talking about various things, but let's talk about this. S&P earnings minus the 10-year TIPS yield. In other words, the earnings versus what you could make somewhere else. So the S&P minus the inflation TIPS means that they're not, when you look, you know, when you're down here, it's like you're not even beating inflation. You know, earnings are not growing faster than inflation. You're better off just betting on inflation. And look, you know, this is when stocks are cheap. This is when stocks are expensive. Really, really clear stuff. 2005, 2008, then we crashed, which caused stocks to be cheaper, but earnings crashed and they turned out to be not that cheap. All right, but then we started rebuilding and moving forward. Same timeline we talked about before, getting into 2011, 12, when things started moving up better. All right, but that's when stocks are expensive. That's when they're cheap down here. And we are, I'm sorry. This is, yeah. Sorry. This is when they're cheap. This is when they're earning much more than they're being given credit for. All right, and keeping ahead of inflation with earnings. This is when we went into a steady decline. Why? Basically, they kind of plateaued out here on earnings, and inflation started catching up. And now inflation's gone like pretty out of control, and earnings are not keeping up. Although there's a lot of people are talking about how you know, greed, excess profits that they're taking. These companies that are passing on ridiculous increases in prices that are nowhere near reflecting, I mean, way over what they're reflected in the cost. And that's driving inflation. It's just a bunch of corporate greed. And why do you have this corporate greed? Because we don't tax them. If you don't tax a company when they make too much money, then they have no incentive not to make too much money. You know what I mean? Because in the 70s, companies used to do a lot more charity stuff. And why was that? Because the taxes in the 70s were like top tax brackets were 60%, 70% for people and corporations. So like a rock band would make, rock band would make $20 million. They get into a top tax bracket. And at that point, they only get paid 30% of the next gig. They're only going to make 70% of the next gig. So instead of doing a gig, they do a charity concert where the tax on the gig gets put back. So the 70% they would have paid in tax gets adjusted as a deduction for what they've already done, and it keeps them floating. So that's why you'd have more benefit costs. It's not because everybody was so nice, it was the tax structure. And the same thing goes for philanthropy and things like that. When you have a certain tax bracket, all you're doing is saying to very, very rich people and very, very rich corporations is you're saying you've made enough money, stop. And it's not like that Atlas, and that's what led to like Atlas Shrugged, right? It's not that the people who make a ton of money go on strike and don't work and say, we're disgusted, we're not going to work. No. But there is a certain amount of money that you make where if you stopped, it would be beneficial to society. If you make $100 million in a year, and they say, okay, now you're in a 90% tax bracket at $100 million, before 100 million, let's say 50 to 100 is 70. Then you get to 100 and it's 90. So now it's up to you. Do you want to work? You're only going to make 10% of what you make. You're only going to keep 10%. The government's going to take 90%. They'll decide who to give it to. Or you can do charity stuff and you decide who to give it to. Just work for zero and claim a deduction and go give it to whoever you want. It's fine. The idea, though, is that it benefits other people, not just your bank account at this point. That's a good thing. Not a bad thing. You just have to accept the fact that nobody needs the next 200 million, the next 100 million after the first 100 million. It's not necessary. And it allows a better distribution of wealth. That's the idea of the thing. That's why it's called progressive tax. And I think that's the thing. I honestly think that most people who are anti-tax, they don't understand the concept that no one is taxing them 70%. These guys driving a truck with a mega hat, nobody's charging you 70% tax. You're going to pay the same tax you're paying now. Your inheritance tax will not be affected when you leave $50,000 to somebody. It's not going to affect that at all. It is going to affect the guy who's a billionaire and is making $1 billion a year. He's going to pay taxes. But these guys, I swear, like most people who are in these who are in these conservative parties and are anti-tax and protesting and whatever, they don't understand this doesn't affect them at all. Or it does affect them because currently we're undertaxing, especially corporations. We are undertaxing them so severely that everybody else, all of us, have to pick up the slack for what we're not taxing corporations. Completely insane. Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, Powell. Yeah, I made this point. Why do we listen to Powell? We just listened to him today. He lies all the time. That's why we have no idea what the Fed is going to do. That's why they are able to surprise us consistently. He says one thing and does another all the time. You cannot rely on anything this man says. He has never steered us in the right direction. Well, maybe a little. I mean, he said rates are going to go up, but there you go. How much? It would have been helpful to say rates are going to go up really hard. So if you have a home or you want to buy a home, you better do it now before you're screwed. That would have been helpful, right? He couldn't have said that. I remember when Alan Greenspan advised everybody to get an adjustable rate mortgage, and then he raised rates like 3% more after that. After telling people to get an adjustable rate mortgage, completely screwing these people. I mean, that's just evil. But Powell's not really better. These people just, they say whatever is going to be expedient, but it has nothing to do with the truth. They don't tell you what they're going to do. They don't tell you when they're going to do it. They don't let you know what their plans are. They don't let you know what they're thinking. They say whatever's going to make the market happy today, and they don't worry about the consequences. And meanwhile, we hang on every word. It's just ridiculous. If you look at retail food and service sales, well, I have to say that this is not good, right? It's down and down and down and down. That's year over year, the month over month. It's hard to even tell that it's going down. So the monthly doesn't. That's the thing. When you look at these, you have to always be aware of what you're looking at. When you look at a month over month chart, it doesn't look bad. But when you look at the year and year, and you're like, something is really going very badly wrong here. That's retail and food services. That's pretty much all the stuff we consume. And it's dropping and dropping and dropping. So we're going to be flat. All this adds up to basically, see, this is a year over year. So we're going to be flat, no growth. And if we go below flat, we're in a recession, like that. Well, it doesn't count as a recession if you don't make it through, and that's why we got the stimulus, right? It doesn't count as a recession if it's not 2 consecutive quarters. So, boom, with the stimulus to get us out of that mode, so nobody can declare a recession on us. And you see it here too with the real disposable income. Obviously, same spike, right? See this right there. So it's the same thing. Real disposable income. That's why we're not spending money on food and services. We don't have it. It's down and down and down. This is 15.5. That's 17 something, right? So that's 10% lower. Is 10% less disposable income than we had in early 2020. So again, I don't care what you tell me, especially if it's the frickin' Fed. I don't care what you tell me. I know I'm saying that, and here's the Fed chart, but the Fed chart is the data. But they say something that ignores the data that they show you. So you tell me that the economy is healthy, but you show me the data that says people have 10% less disposable income. All right, and then I haven't done it recently, but at other times we've gone over it and said, okay, what's going on here? People are borrowing record amounts and going record amounts into debt to make up for the lack of disposable income. They're trying to keep up the spending and trying to keep up their lifestyle, but they've got 10% less money. Therefore, they're going 10% deeper into debt to try to maintain their lifestyle every year. And it's not just consumers, corporations are also record debt. Rates are rising, debts are at record, consumer debt at record highs, corporate debt at record highs, government debt record highs, which causes what? A tremendous demand for money, and all these people bidding to have money roll over for their debts causes higher rates also. And that, in the end, is why the Fed has to raise rates whether they want to or not, because they can pretend that they control rates, but the reality is rates are a market force. It's you're selling bonds at an auction. they're going to sell for the price they sell for. And the Fed has been a major buyer of those bonds, and they're tapering off still. And foreign investors have their own problems. They may not come in to rescue us. That could become a problem. That's what happened to Greece. All of a sudden, nobody wanted their bonds. They were too in debt. There was, somebody looks at a country like Greece and they say, oh, and what triggered Greece's crisis is because Goldman Sachs had been cooking their books. And when Goldman Sachs when the government changed hands and they did an audit from somebody who wasn't Goldman Sachs, the people who did the audit were like, this is, this is bullshit. You guys are you're hiding this and you're hiding that and you're hiding that, and in hiding, I mean, in the nicest possible non-GAAP way. When corporations say non-GAAP, it's like that's exactly what Greece's budget was. It was non-GAAP. So they had a note that made it legal, but the reality was it wasn't real at all. It was bullshit. Same as the bank bullshit in 2008. The books were bullshit. They never made the money they thought. They never made the money they claimed to make. They claimed they were making amazing profits based on mortgage-backed securities that they anticipated would do such and such into maturity. And when those things crashed, all the bank profits evaporated. They were all bullshit. They had already claimed them for years. They would claim that these mortgage-backed securities had a steady rate of blah, and they would do this and that, and they would last for this long, and they would make this much money, and they had this much reserve, and everything was fine. Turned out, no, wasn't fine at all. All blew up. Same thing happened in Greece. They didn't do the reserve. They didn't worry about this. They didn't put the pension money here. All this crap. All these different little things. Bunch of little things that add up to a big deal. So investors looked at the books, looked at Greece, looked at their assets, looked at their GDP, their productivity, looked at how much tax was already being placed on the people, and said, where are you going to get this money from? I'm lending you money. How are you going to pay it back? I think you're risky. I'm not going to lend you money at 6% anymore. I'm going to lend you money at 18%, 20%, 22%. That's what blew Greece up. Simple thing like that. The risk was higher than was originally reflected in the security, okay? We have this problem on the municipal level, on the city level, on the county, state, federal. We have it with the individuals. We have it with the corporations. Debt, 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 debt. Not enough money for retirement. Not enough money for emergencies. Not enough money for infrastructure. Okay, we're like a business running on very poor cash flow that can't afford to fix the roof and can't afford to fix the door and can't afford to pay the burglar alarm company, and we don't have fire insurance anymore, and and we can't afford to advertise, and the customers have left the area, so nobody's even coming in anyway, and we're just watching the clock count down. All right, so there's things to be concerned about. Let's put it that way. There are things to be concerned about, but it would be a lot worse if every other country wasn't in the same terrible, terrible position. I don't know what's going to happen. I honestly don't, but I don't think it's going to be good. It probably won't be, but it could also be dragged out for a long time. I mean, these debt problems aren't new. And Japan is 300% of their GDP in debt. We're only 120, 130% of our GDP in debt. So that's nothing. We laugh at Japan. We could go another 30 trillion in debt. We'll be fine. We're still lower than they are. Will it ever blow up? Probably. But I think honestly, I really think that they're playing it. I think they're playing it to like end the world before the debt crisis. I think that's a game plan. That's why they're letting all this global warming go and whatever. It's like it's easier to just let everybody melt and pretend that our books are fine. So real disposable income. So yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. You look at disposable income. And here's the kicker for this. This is what really bothers me. you're not accounting for the fact that this is a total disposable income, billions of dollars of real disposable income. So it's trillions actually. So $15.5 trillion of real disposable income, right? But the problem is, look where it is. It's all in the hands of these guys. These guys aren't going to that sandwich shop by your office, or certainly not enough of them to make the sandwich shop happy, because they're buying the same sandwich as everybody else, but everybody else can't afford the sandwich shop. These guys can't afford the $20 pizza with not even a topping. I had a pizza in town. I live in Delray Beach. Everything's crazy expensive. I ordered a pizza, and I just was like, I felt like having a cheesesteak pizza. Up in New York, you used to get cheesesteak pizzas, which are really good, like hot peppers and good steak and stuff like that. So I had this Italian place make it for me, $50. I used to get the cheesesteak pizza up north. It was $20. Now it's $50 they wanted here for the cheesesteak pizza. I didn't think to ask. I just said I want some steak. I said, yeah, can you put the shaved steak? Can you put the steak that you use for like for the steak and fries, because this is an Italian restaurant. So I said, can you take the steak that you use for the steak and fries and put that on my pizza and put it on with the cheesesteak toppings and so on and so forth? Because I was like really craving this. I used to have them all the time up north. And the guy's like, sure, I'll do that for you. Boom, boom, boom. So they deliver the pizza. I figured they charge me the amount of the steak plus a normal, a normal pizza with peppers and onions and so on and so forth. No, we made up this price, $50 for one pizza, $10 a slice or whatever, or $8 a slice. Crazy. It's hard to enjoy it when you're like eating a slice and thinking like you paid $8 for that slice. It seems like a little off. Takes away all the enjoyment. Where was it? Oh yeah. So anyway, so what we have is we have these people, the top 10%. These people, really these people, because these guys are way richer than these guys. But either way, this number here, go down here, and we're up around, let's say, 250,000 a year. Okay. So the top 10%, you got to be making $250,000 a year. And I got to tell you, in my town, $250,000 a year does not buy you much, especially after taxes. These guys can't even afford to be in my town. There's just no possible way. Even if they just get the $20 pizza, it's still really not possible. So we have this, and this is again the new reality, right? Just like there's no office workers, there's no middle class. There's rich people, and there are poor people. These guys are kind of the middle class, but honestly, $125,000 before tax, take home, let's call it $80,000 for a family is not really middle class anymore, is it? It's barely middle class. It's struggling middle class. And those guys, that's the top part of the bottom 80%. The guys both of these used to be middle class. These guys are barely middle class, and these guys, and they're really not much better off than the real poor people. Or these are impoverished, but these people are, it's a day-to-day struggle. Even if you're making $60,000 for a household or $80,000 for a household, you're walking home with what, $50,000? You gotta live on $4,000 a month with a family of 4. You gotta save for college. You gotta pay medical expenses. You gotta put something away for retirement. Or how? How? And because we don't tax these people, they get richer and richer and richer and suck up more and more of the money. It's not a zero-sum game, but it's not a everybody wins kind of thing either. The pie doesn't keep growing larger. The economy, that's the thing you got to realize, this wealth outpaces the growth of the economy. Therefore, it has to get taken away from everybody else. There's no other way it can grow. If the total wealth is outpacing the economic growth, then that money is being taken by the wealthiest from the less wealthy. Very simple concept. Very, very simple concept that people refuse to accept. This is why we have taxes. This is why we had revolutions against the people who used to make this kind of money without being taxed. They were called the noble class. They would tax us. They would not tax themselves. They got richer and richer and richer. Everybody else got poorer and poorer. Until basically you got the five guys, you got the guys with the castles and their retinue of people who they took care of, and everybody else was a serf. That's what we're heading towards right now. We're more likely we're going to head towards another revolution because people aren't going to stand it for that long. It's tricky though. So we talked about that. Here's the inflation data. It's coming down. Okay, but not if there's a bout of strikes and workers want more money and so on and so forth, and not if there's right now the port in Los Angeles is closed because of a strike of the workers. It's not closed; it's just slow. All the West Coast ports are on strike. So there's that. Then there's whatever happens. Oil prices right now kind of stabilized, but they were 100 something last year, so who knows? So they've calmed down, but 5% is not, stopped. 5% is far from stopped. And England, in fact, is back at 8.6%. They thought they were getting better, and they got worse today, or worse this month. So we don't know that ours is stopped. We don't know that it's here, and we know that the Fed knows they're not going to get to 2% without a couple of more hikes. This blue line is what? PPI. So the producer price index has come down nicely. That's because a lot of raw material costs have come down, and the shipping is better or has been better. Here's the core PPI, that's still up here. So there's the fuel energy portion of it that's come down quite a lot, but the core is still up there, but that's still not terrible. But these other guys are kind of stubbornly over 4%, like 5%. So will the PPI flow to the CPI and the PCE, or will the demand here bring this back up? That's what we got to figure out. And then I talked about this. How is wealth divided in the US? Okay, so the top 1% now have, and they used to have 20%. Keep this in mind. They used to have 20% of the wealth. Now they've got, going to call that $40 trillion. Plus this is not current, well, it's last year. But they got about $40 trillion, the top 1%. The total is 40 plus, this is not, well, 40 plus 70 is 110, plus 25 is 135, plus 15, 135, 140, 150, and I'm going to say, so you take that and you add that, 15, so 145, 160. So out of $160 trillion, the top 1% have 40. They have 1/4 of all the wealth, basically. And what I was saying is that the next 20%, and keep in mind, this is not including the 1%. The next 20%, not including this amount, they've got $70 trillion basically, which is about half of all the wealth. So the top 20%, not including the 1%, have half. It's 70 plus 40, right? So it's 110. So out of 160, there you go. So it's 110 divided by 160. 68%, 2/3, more than 2/3 of the money is for the top 20% of the wealth. That's all the stuff. And what's the stuff? The stuff is real estate, stocks, retirement accounts, businesses, assets, blah, 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 blah. 68%, almost 70% goes to these guys. The rest of what's left, so there's not much left. When you take 160 times not 0.68, it'd be the reciprocal, 0.32 is 51, so it's $51 trillion. So the top 20% get 2/3. The next 20%, the people above the middle class, they get 50, I'm sorry, they get half of what's left. Of all the money's left, half of it goes to these guys, and effectively the rest goes to these guys, and these guys get nothing. They get 15 trillion. The 10% of the wealth goes to the bottom 40%. You know, it's obviously grossly unfair. Grossly unfair. And you got to realize this is 1%. You got to keep that in mind. This 1%, this is 19. So multiply this by 19. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You get the idea. Anyway, so this 1%, this is 19 combined percents. These guys go out past this screen in wealth. And it's really, really rarely presented properly because people don't understand the scaling. They don't get the concept. It's like this, but this isn't wealth. This is their income. This is their income. This is why they're so wealthy. Look at their income compared to anybody else. But this is the actual wealth, and the wealth is beyond ridiculous. And it's only been, well, it's only been one generation of low inheritance taxes, and this is what's happened. Another, you know, if we wipe out inheritance taxes, it'll be game over in 20 years. In 20 years, there'll be nothing left for anybody who didn't start out with a ton of money. As it stands now, you just really got to get this. 19 times more people are here than here. So this, compared to these guys per person, 19 times out. That's how wealthy they are compared to everybody else per capita. That's pretty insane. So anyway, back to this. So then I was talking about blah, 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 blah. What do we talk about that? Right. So given that this too is a reality, this is not going to change. This isn't going to bounce back. It's not like the bottom 80% are down a little and they'll catch up. It's not, it's over. It's a game. It really is game over for the people in the bottom. They're never going to catch up. It's going to get worse and worse. It's going to be like Mad Max or something at some point. I mean, we're really, I don't know. I don't know if there's any possible way to fix it. You'd have to radically change everything and start taxing wealth tremendously. Literally, they talk about confiscation. You have to confiscate the wealth. You have to force it to be redistributed. You have to say, this is not fair. We cannot run a country. We cannot have a republic this way. When 1% of the people go off the screen in wealth and everybody else has to share what's left. It's insane. All of these groups are 20 times bigger than this group, and that's their combined wealth of 20 times of this amount of people. So anyway, so then I was talking about, so what have companies done to adapt? Okay, so what Disney and many other companies, Disney's an example, ski resorts, I talked about ski resorts, I talked about Disney, I talked about restaurants, and I see in my town, they've done the math. And although 1% doesn't seem like much, there's 8 billion people on the planet. So the top 1% is 80 million people, and they've got families. And you have to understand that there's so much wealth in the top 1% that the wife, the kids, even the nanny has more money to spend than somebody in the next 10%. You know, if you're just adjacent to these people, you're going to have a couple, you know, you have $100,000. I mean, I imagine most of the people who are billionaires, they really can't even imagine how anyone could live on less than $100,000. They don't pay, there are some, but they don't pay their maids $50,000. They pay their maid $100,000. I think that's like a minimum wage. It's like, how can you possibly live on less than $100,000? I was reading an article about this girl who's like, I told Jackie she should do this. She just basically a nanny, you know, a traveling nanny for rich people. And once you get into it, once you start getting referrals, it's like a lifestyle. You just go with the family wherever they go. And these people go on like constant vacations. You fly on private jets. You stay in the best hotels. Everything, you know, other than the fact you have to constantly take care of their kids. It's like an amazing job. You're getting paid to like travel around the world, stay in the greatest hotels, eat in the greatest restaurants, see everything. I'm like, Jackie, why don't you do this for a few years? It's like totally cool. Like a good job, man. I'd do it. And these guys just pay for anything. Anyway, so Disney, ski places, even movie theaters. We have an iPic in town. iPic is a movie theater you eat in, very fancy. You sit in like a pod. There's like a 2-person pod. So like you and whoever you're with, you sit in this little enclosed space. It's like you're alone in the movie theater, except the waiters are walking around. They serve, you know, you press buttons on the menu, you get your food, and it's delivered. And you sit there. It's a private movie experience. It's gorgeous. It's comfortable. It's wonderful. But it's so creepy. It's just like, you know, your own private little screening room, but there are like, you know, 30, 40 pods in the theater. You pay $25 a person for the movie, and another, you know, and then dinner's going to be like 50, 60 bucks. So you end up spending a couple $100 to go see a movie. But that's what they cater for. The ski resorts now, a couple of $100 for this, but now it's, you know, now they give you there's less people than there used to be. It used to be crowded. Now it's not really so crowded, and they have less people. They have limits on the slopes, but it's a fortune. It's not like everybody can go. You know, I used to pay for my own skiing. I used to go all over the world skiing, and I used to love it. And it was never a consideration how much the lift tickets were. Now they're like $200 in some places. And Disney is $200 a day. You know, especially it's only cheap if you don't want to do a park hopper. You have to specifically go to only one park for the day. If you want to go from park to park and things like that, more than $200 a day. And the restaurants, like I mentioned in the article, there's a sushi place down the street from me. It's a fixed price, $150. They don't want people coming in and ordering a few pieces of sushi. They don't want that. They have 3 seatings, and each seating, it's $150. They give you, you know, basically 15 pieces of fish. It's $10 a thing. You're either gonna come in and eat it or you're not. It's freaking great, but it's crazy expensive. But hotels, a lot of things are starting to cater to those like I said, it's not really 80 million people. It's 80 million people and their families. So you're talking about, 300, 400 million people who can spend like this. But that's a lot. That's a lot of people. And those people travel a lot. They don't travel like regular people. They travel constantly. And you guys know people like this. They're just always going somewhere, doing something, because the cost of it is nothing. The cost of it is nothing, and they spend it, and these businesses are starting to cater to it. But what happens when they start catering to it? They don't cater to regular people. So skiing is closed to poor people. Disney is closed to poor people. Um, so many things. Concerts. That's another one. Concerts. You can't go to a concert if you're poor anymore. It's a major expense. Baseball games too. Yeah, baseball games too. I mean, I was looking at prices, and they're cheaper than I thought. People are telling me about $50, $60 tickets. I haven't paid less than $100 a ticket for ages for baseball games or football games. I don't know where they're getting these numbers from, but I guess, maybe if you go to like the bleachers or something like that. But, good seats at a game, way over $100. So you take your kids to a game, it's like $500 for tickets, and then you spend then insane prices for everything else. And then the question is whether or not this is a fad. Like, this is the problem in the Roaring '20s, right? In the Roaring '20s, you had the same thing, this huge surge of wealth at the top, but it all fell apart. And why did it fall apart? It fell apart because you made everyone else so poor, the factory workers, the farmers, and don't forget, most of America was a farmer back then. Almost everybody was farmers. You had farmers, factory workers, so on and so forth. They were paid so little that when the farms started collapsing, and all the machinery that the farms used started collapsing, the whole thing fell apart really fast. And the rich people who were making money off all the stocks that sold to the people who sold to the farmers and blah, 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 it all caved in as one great group. It wasn't sustainable. The rich people had sucked so much money out of the rest of society that nothing was being maintained, and nothing was being and in other words, farmers were over farming their land to try to stay solvent. They weren't rotating their crops and doing things they needed to do. Irrigation infrastructure wasn't being built properly. That's what led to the Dust Bowl. A little bit of drought and everything fell, and the whole thing just started falling apart and decaying. It took years, and nobody gave a shit while it was happening. All right, that's what we're doing now with global warming. It's taking years, but nobody gives a crap, and until it all collapses, nobody's going to do anything about it. Then we'll have another Roosevelt, and hopefully we'll do something about it. But I think that's what it's going to take. Anyway, so the real point is, you got to look at these macro trends, and that's what we're starting to look at. And you got to think to yourself, how is this really going to play out? And what's going to be the safer places to put our money? What's going to survive if things go bad? And what's going to thrive? What will do well? Experiences for rich people is a good business. Catering to the top 1% is a good business. And you got to think about that. You got to look at where the money is going, and who has it and who doesn't have it, and how are they able to spend. And it's very clear who has it, and it's very clear who doesn't have it. So, you look at, Taco Bell. You look at, there have to be restaurants that exist at like the lower levels that cater to people, but we're stretching this at right now live. We are stretching this to a point. What does this mean? Top 1%. It just kind of shows you like there's always someone above you, right? Like for the 1%, for the 1%, they have this, but the 0.01%, they've got 43 times more money. It's like that every time you go up, the people have that much more money than you do. We have to sit there and consider like who's going to be able to make money, who's going to have an audience. And we were talking about that with the dollar store, with Target. I think last week we were talking about that, weren't we? That you have to just imagine like where are people migrating to, but we've got people with their backs up against the wall. They don't really have anywhere left to go. And they can't even afford to go to McDonald's or to Burger King or to Taco Bell or something like that. That's terrible. Because I'll tell you what, you don't have enough people in the 1% who crave Taco Bell. By the way, I ate at Taco Bell. Okay? I ate at Taco Bell because my brother really wanted to have a Taco Bell something. I don't know what it was. I was like, I literally have said no to Taco Bell since my kids were like 10. And I forgot why. So like 10 years I haven't had Taco Bell. I forgot why. I got a quesadilla. It was the worst thing I ever ate in my life. So I'll be at least another 10 years before I have Taco Bell again. That was horrifyingly bad. Anyway, so point was, these guys aren't going to Taco Bell. Taco Bell can't survive on them. So I don't think, so when the poor people can't afford to go to Taco Bell, you're not going to count on the rich people to come in and spend their money there. It's not like that. Disney is pursuing a different strategy. Disney is kicking all the poor people out and saying to the rich people, hey, we're your kind of place now. You come in, because they don't care what it costs. They don't care how much it is per day. They just want the experience. That's why the Disney passes now have these line cutting things that we pay even more money for. Another $100. You pay $200 for a ticket, you pay another $100 for the line cutting pass. And then you walk past everybody else, walk past all the peasants who could only afford $200 a day, and you just walk right onto every ride. They've always had a fast pass, which allowed in a democratic sort of way, you could book yourself a line cut at a future ride, and you could do that a few times a day. So certain rides you could zip past, and that was a big thing at Disney, and everybody used to love that. They took that away from the poor people, and they said, now you got to pay for it. Everybody's got to pay for it. So if you want it, you pay it. This is what's happening. And Disney can only fit 20 million people a year in their Orlando parks. That's their maximum population of people is 20 million. So there's, what did we say it was? What's the number? 80 million, 300, about 400 million. So there's 400 million top 1%ers who can afford to go to Disney. Only 20 million fit in. They can only go once every 20 years. So on an annual basis, they can really only go once every 20 years. So Disney's never going to run out of these people. They did the math. They did the math, and they did the intelligent thing for their company. They don't. The rest of these people are just crowding out the ultra wealthy people who spend more money. So why bother letting anybody else in? I want the person who comes to the park and not only goes to the park all day and spends $300 a person for a family of 4, but at night they go to one of the restaurants at Disney that cost a couple of $100 a person. You know that Victorian Albert? Well, probably don't know. In the Floridian Hotel in Disney, there's a place called Victorian Albert, I think is the name. It's a really, really good restaurant, but they are now charging $300+ a person to go there. Freaking insane. People go, it's packed, got to reserve. Not only that, but the Floridian's $1,000 a night for most of their rooms. Anywho, so that's where I'm at. That's what I wanted to talk about, was the background, and where we're not leading to any actual trades, but I think it's important we talk about the economic background. And so my issue is, I think that there's a big weakness in there's a big hole in the economy, And it's really like a house of cards, because this is not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, we've got to be really careful about what we put money into. You can't just assume that things are going back to normal. Normal may not exist anymore. This is a very challenging time. All right. Now, Andrew says, would you comment on the VIX? Does it affect your thinking on a trading position? I mean, when the VIX is high, we like to sell a lot of premium. You know, we sell more puts and more short calls because the VIX is high. When the VIX is low, it's not as attractive to sell. We have to adapt different strategies. But as it is, the VIX only measures like how worried people are. That's basically what the VIX tells you, is how worried traders are, how much they're hedging their bets. That's basically what the VIX ends up indicating. It is not a very strong indicator. I wish it were, but it's not. So mostly it affects the decision of how we're going to structure an options trade to take advantage of the premium we can sell. And I missed that. I like a high VIX. I love to sell a lot of premium. Any thoughts on One Main Financial for Peter? Peter, I don't have any thoughts on One Main Financial. Ask me in the chat. I will be very happy to look it up for you. All right. Okay, anyway, so some good background stuff. We will hopefully next week be able to convert this into some actual picks. And we'll probably, yeah, in fact, let's make sure we do that. Okay, so remind me next week, we're definitely going to start saying what we know now, because it took me longer than I thought to talk about the background. But given what we know now about the background, about what I'm worried about what I want to invest in, let's now identify a few things we're going to definitely trade. Okay, and we're going to go through that watch list. I'm going to pick out, like, let's say at least 3 trades next week that we're going to actually do. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it, and we'll do it again next week. All right. Take care.